Hello. So, welcome to the first full video on the actual content of the course. We're starting here, week 1, video 1, with music and time, or rhythm in general. And rhythm is a really important and abstract musical concept. I think it has a lot of terminologies and things that we'll need to define, but it is so foundational to musical understanding that it is so important that we start here. I think we can't grasp any of the fundamentals of music theory really until we have a basic sense of rhythm. So in this video, we're going to cover just some background philosophical stuff about rhythm. We're going to do some musical examples, and we're going to look at some actual music, and we're going to go over the basics of rhythmic notation. So what is a quarter note? What is an eighth note? What is a 16th note? And how do these relate to each other? This will be a pretty quick introduction to music and time. So here we go. So the word rhythm comes from the Greek rheuma or rhythmos, which means flow. So that which flows. Rheuma, and you might have heard like rheumatoid arthritis. This is now a medical term. It has to do with how our muscles move or flow together. So this is in the musculoskeletal system, but still it has to do with flow. And for the Greeks, this was really to do with water. And so in a stream or waves on the beach, they flow and they constantly recur. So they have this everlasting but never the same quality, right? So that the stream is always running and it's always flowing, and it's always flowing over the same rocks and kind of has that same shape. It continues to be the stream, but it's never the same. And so this is the same with, this is a good analogy for rhythm. It's good to grasp the etymology of that. Music, though, like I say, it's so important to understand rhythm and musical time, because music is an artwork that is distributed out over time, that unfolds in time. And I think it's just so appropriate that, we as beings that exist perceive the flow of time, perceive the rhythm of time, and it's just so appropriate that we would create an artwork like music that is so important to us, that unfolds in time just like our consciousness does. So I think this is absolutely crucial. The flow of consciousness, the river of consciousness, the river of time, and all of this are very much are very much presented by music to us and made art as the materials of the art form. Okay, so how do we measure time in music? Let's look. So we have what's called tempo. You probably know what a tempo is. Tempo is basically just the speed you're going. So how fast am I going? I'm going this many beats per minute. So I can calculate based on the minute how many beats per minute, and that will be my frequency or my pace. We use machines like metronomes to do this. And you can find free online metronomes, pretty straightforward. To find a free online metronome, just search free online metronome and pull one up and see if you can play around with change the BPM, listen to the different clicks, listen to your heart rate, and see if you can compare. So now, yeah, like I say, we also have this term beat or pulse, and it's different than tempo. A beat or a pulse can occur at any tempo. So, for example, the human heartbeat, which occurs at many different tempi, but usually like between 50 and 90 for resting, and then elevated heartbeat can be like 100, 110, 120. So that's a whole range of musical beats per minute as well. Now, if you're familiar with tempo and things like this, slower music tends to be about 60 to 80 BPM. Medium music is like 80 to 110, and 120 plus is pretty fast. But even at a fast tempo, you can have slow music. So it gets a little bit complicated, but this is in general. How fast are we going is the first question. And then does that correspond to which beat does that? So how fast do the beats go by? So when I have this pulses, how fast do they go by? Now, let's just jump right into a musical example, actually, because I think it's really important to hear just what I mean by pulse and by this constant flow of reoccurring things. So here's a video.
If you're ready for the one and only, make some noise. Belgium, are you ready? The whole world, are you ready? Please welcome the one and only Charlotte de Witte.
Do you hear the beat? Okay, so you probably do. I mean, it's you can't miss it. It's the main part of this music. So 1, 2, 3, 4, da 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 da. Okay, that's the beat. So the thing I want you to notice right away is that the beat is continuous and flowing. This is actually maybe not so much flowing as it is kind of like pulsing, right? Beating. It's really beating. And this is 4 beats organized like this, just like in the pulse image you see above. So 1, 2, 3, 4, ta, 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 right? And this is kind of like one of our most common and most basic musical organization patterns, which has to do with a group of 4 that then recurs. So a pulse in groups of 4, bum, 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 etc. So for many of you, this is probably review. I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page with what I mean by pulse and beat. Now, there's a few more things to notice here, though. This isn't so simple as you might think. Like, what else is going on? Now, you might listen close and you might hear boom, tss, 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 like boom, tss, boom, tss, boom, tss, you know. So there's a down, a doom, 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 right? The kick. And then there's the upper note, boom, tss, boom, tss, boom, tss. And what's the upper note? The upper note is the hi-hat or that higher sound. Tss, tss, tss. So actually, if you start counting that, you might go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, you know. So try to count with it. Okay, so yeah, so this is Techno. This is Charlotte de Witte, and Techno really drives home that 4 on the floor kick pattern, and then you have that high upbeat. The other thing, the last thing in there you should notice is that there's a constant a 16th note pattern. Okay, so we'll cover what that means, but this running over top of the doom, 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 doom. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Really fast running in there. Okay? And now this is so interesting because so much music happens with flowing 16th notes. Let me just pop in this so I don't blow the ears. And then let me back up a tiny bit. Okay, so you got the idea. What I've done here is I've played both, I've played some techno music alongside some classical music, and this is Bach in Prelude in C major from WTC 1, or Well-Tempered Clavier number 1. So this is the prelude to the big works of Bach, that, you know, the big fugue work, the Well-Tempered Clavier. And this is also happening in running 16th notes, just like the in the techno example. Each note has the same amount of space. And overall, they group together 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in groups of 8, basically. And those almost have a lapping motion like a wave, like. So listen to the waves, listen to the rhythmos of it. Etc. So that wave thing is, I think, a really relevant metaphor. Great. So we'll return to this and explain a little bit more about what this sheet music is saying to us and how it articulates this rhythm, because it looks complicated for sure at first, but this is what we're going to do in this class. We're going to look at this music and we're going to understand it after a little while. So let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of this. Like I said, the beat and pulse often occurs in quarter notes. So that techno beat, we could write it out like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. And these are what we call the quarter note. And the quarter note exists right in the middle of what is called the rhythm tree. So here's a rhythm tree. And this breaks down, if you have 4 quarter notes, you can combine those into 2 like this that we call half notes. And then those combine into one big whole note. So the big whole note at the top contains all of what you see below. The big whole note splits into 2 half notes, splits into 4 quarter notes, splits into 8 eighth notes, and then 16 16th notes, of course. So let's look at this in a little more detail. Notice that the top ones have the open note head and the bottom ones have the closed note head. So a closed note head usually indicates shorter actually always indicates shorter values. So quarters have closed note head and then shorter, eighths, 16ths, etc. So you can see that here. The quarters have closed note head and then they go shorter. The quicker ones have closed note heads, 8th notes and 16th notes. Then with the open note heads, that's just the opposite. Those indicate longer values. So half notes, whole notes, etc. have open note heads. Okay, so that's we're getting into notation. The stem. So the stem on a note goes up on the right side or down on the left so that they rotate onto each other. You can kind of see that here if it rotated. And the stem just differentiates different notes. So for example, a whole note doesn't have a stem, but half note and all beneath have stems. And you can see that when we get back to the rhythm tree. I'll fix that. So the flag, then you've seen some flags. Flags are a short arc attaching to the right of the stem, and each edition of the flag halves the value of the note. So this is an 8th note you see here with 1 flag, and then a 16th note with 2 flags. Now 2 16th notes would fit in an 8th note. So and this will start to make sense. It'll all come together. So line drawn to connect the smaller note values is a beam, and this can replace the flags when they're grouped together. So this shows the beams just cross over, they replace the flags. This is still an 8th note and still 16th notes here. But instead of the flags like you saw above, they have beams there that group them into the correct groupings that you want for your piece. Okay, so just to define each note individually, the whole note is the open note head at the top, has a duration of 1 whole measure in 4/4 time, so that divides into 4 quarter notes. And we'll discuss what 4/4 time is compared to other kinds of musical organization, but we're just starting here at the most simple. This is a half note here. So the half note is an open note head with a stem, and that's just half the length of the whole note there. Here's a quarter note, and the quarter note we've seen before, that was the one we started with. That is your basic pulse. That's the beat. So the quarter note gets the beat. There's 4 of those, and that defines that beat that we heard in the techno song, and also in the Bach, because we can count the quarter notes. We don't hear the quarter notes so much, but we can count them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Oh, sorry. Actually, I counted that wrong because there's 8 per measure. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, but because that piece is organized into big groups of 8, the grouping into 4, the smaller groupings don't necessarily sound quite right. So 1, 2. That's a weird place to start too, and that's why this one, it flows just better in 16th notes. So let's keep going. The eighth note then has a flag and is half the value of the quarter note and twice the value of the 16th notes. And so then lastly, the 16th note has the double flag, and that's right there at the bottom. 4 16th notes fit in the group of 2 eighth notes, fit in the group of 1 quarter note, fit in the and then you need another quarter note to get a half note, and you need another half note to get a whole note. Okay, so hopefully this kind of explains the rhythm tree to you, gets you a little bit more familiar with some of this notation of rhythm. And in a minute, we'll be able to return to that Bach piece, and we'll be able to look at that rhythm and kind of figure it out. So that rhythm tree, go Google rhythm tree, get to know it. Like, I think you should maybe practice writing some of these on your own. It's good to practice. Let me see if I can, write an eighth note. Let me see if I can write 4 16th notes, so I can show you, yeah, so what you should do is just get practicing and start drawing a little dot, get a line there, try it with a flag, there's an eighth note, maybe try like 2 eighth notes combined together with a beam, and that equals 1 quarter note. So make some notes in your notes like this. 2 quarter notes equals what? Half note. 2 half notes equals, oops, sorry, that looks like a quarter. 2 half notes there equals whole note. And stuff like this. So you can kind of keep going like this, but just get yourself some practice writing these notes. So here's 16ths, something like that. And 4 16ths equals 1 quarter note. So you can kind of skip one, which also equals 2 eighth notes. And stuff like that. Okay, anyways. So get practicing and try writing it down. Use your hand. I think you get that tactile experience, and you get to actually practice getting your musical notation looking nice, which is, again, just a great way to communicate to other musicians what your intentions are for them. And if you're a composer, this will help. So, a couple more things. We want to compare the rhythm tree to the rest tree. So we'll also want to, at the same time we get to know the rhythms and we get to practice with these basic note values, we'll want to practice with the basic rest values as well. So the rests here, you can see line up directly, so the whole note is at the top, and there's a line there with the box under it. I'll explain that when we see one in a score. And then there's 2 half note rests there, just by where the half notes are. There's 4 quarter note rests. Now this one's going to be much more important. You want to practice drawing that quarter note rest. It's a pretty unique and identifiable, pretty unique and identifiable image. Let me see if I can get. Let's practice drawing a quarter note rest. So a quarter note rest. Here's a quarter note, and then equals as a rest. I go down to the right, down to the left, and then I swirl like this. So you kind of start with a little lightning bolt. Oh, I did the first one. I did the first one wrong. Yeah. My bad. Okay, so quarter note equals, and then down to the right, down to the left, down to the right again, and then swirl. So it kind of makes this like this. Practice writing that a few times. See if you can you see that? Yeah, down to the right, down to the left, down to the right, and then swirl. Down to the right, down to the left, down to the right, and then swirl like that. Yeah, so you can just draw it like that, a little lightning bolt. I'm not so good at drawing quarter note rests. That's pretty challenging stuff. Just kidding. Great. Okay, so and then the 16th notes rest at the bottom. And this is really important because music is not just sound. Music is also silence. So we're going to have in your reading a little bit about silence as well, and just how that might work in musical context sometimes. Okay, getting close to the end here. Let's return to the score of the Bach, and we'll just look at a few things about it so we can get a sense of how does that constant 16th note pattern look like this. I mean, I see 16th notes at the top, right? There's the double bar. The double beam that connects the group of 2 16th notes there, and then the group of 4 16th notes. But what about at the bottom? There's half notes, and what's this dot? Okay, so there's a couple more things for us to cover. Let's look here. So that eighth note rests there. Now, an eighth note rest, if we remember, contains two 16th notes, right? So an eighth note, as we talked about, eighth note equals 2/16. There's 2/16 equals eighth note. So an eighth note rest, which looks like this, equals 2/16 note rests, which look like this, kind of have like little backwards sevens. So those are 2/16 note rests equals one eighth note rest. Okay? So if we have an eighth note rest there, we have 2/16 in that space. And then there's two more 16ths next to it, and then four. So that makes 8. Ta 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 ta. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? And then on the bottom, in the very lowest, we have two notes that happen at the same, or right next to each other here, which you can see there. So there's two notes marked by pink arrows. One is a half note and one is an eighth with a dot. So this is a little bit confusing at first because I said half note takes up all this time. A half note takes up 2 quarter notes, and I don't know, there's like a 16th note rest here. So I'm asking you, if you look at this, can you make sense out of this? Just really quick. I mean, can you kind of figure out what's happening here? There's a 16th note rest in the middle there, and then an eighth note with a dot, and then a quarter note, which you can see here marked in orange and in the orange circle there. So those two belong together. The half note at the bottom belongs on its own, and then the top line has 16th notes. Now let me prove this to you. What does the dot mean here? The dot extends the value of a note, or extends the duration of a note, by 1.5 times its original value. And so another way of saying that is it adds half of the note value to the note, and each additional dot does that successfully. So you can have a double dot there, which you'll see. But so the dot with the half note makes a half note plus a quarter note, because a quarter note is half of a half note, and the dot adds that to that. So it just makes a longer note. It's somewhere between a half note and a whole note. See what I mean? If a half note is 2 quarter notes, and then a dotted half note is 3 quarter notes, and a whole note is 4 quarter notes. So the dot allows you to just have different durational values there. And what Johann Sebastian Bach is doing in the piece we are just looking at is that he is writing this in 3 separate voices, basically, so that each one gets its own rhythm. Now, if we look at the bottom, we see that C, I'll tell you these notes are C, that are just in half notes here. So that's the one just below the orange circle, the half notes that run at the bottom, and it stays C. And that's just because he wants you to hold that note for the whole measure while you play the other notes. Oops, sorry. So you hear that note ring that whole measure, right? And then the second note there, the one that's circled with the dot, the dotted eighth, comes in right after that first note. There's the first note. And then the second one comes in, and that one also gets held. So it has a dot, and then it's tied to the next note, which means it's held through just as long as that. It's almost as long as that half note, but 1/16th note short, because it has to come in 1/16th note after the half note. Okay? And then the other ones can just be written as 16th notes because they don't need to be held. So his intention was okay, so I'm holding that bass note, I'm holding that second note, and then I'm playing the upper notes as 16th notes. But they all, in their attacks, in the moment of the onset of the note, they all sound in 16th notes. Ta 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 ta. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that groups, as I say, into those big groups of 4, which makes this just you can play it on top of a techno track. And you can, yeah, so it lines up exactly. And this is just to say that 4/4, this common beat pattern of having a group of 4 main pulses at the quarter note level, by far the most common everywhere in our musical repertoire. All right, so thanks. I'll see you tomorrow.